As usual, this guide will go fairly fast and be split into a few parts: the build and what you need, what the class feels like to play, how to deal the most damage while keeping the group alive, detailed explanations on how to navigate your rotation, and then lastly your utility and how to use it. Just a reminder that these guides are focused on Mythic Plus and at a medium key level. You should be able to take the information given here and have success in every situation up to around key levels of 23 or 24. The goal at the minimum is to have you absolutely blasting through your 15s. Now let's begin. As Holy, you'll be Kyrie and Mechanicos 100% of the time, with this conduit setup and pathing. This is purely a damage-focused Covenant choice. Holy's kit does not need any assistance with healing beyond what they already have with their tier set, conduits, and legendaries. Due to this, you can dish out ungodly amounts of damage for a healer in both AoE and single target. Your legendaries will of course be Unity first and Flash Concentration. I personally make Unity on Helm and Flash Conc on Neck, but it really depends on whether you get raid loot or not. Just make them in whatever slots you want, ensuring that they don't prevent you from getting your 4-piece tier bonus, and go haste first always. This is true for all gear drops. Holy simply loves haste first in Mythic Plus. Moving on to talents, this is your standard config. There are some things you can change, but ideally you'll never stray from this. If you're doing a dungeon and you're scared you won't be able to heal through it, you can run Benediction over Divine Star, but keep in mind that you'll be giving up around 15% of your overall damage, or more, in exchange for approximately 6 or 7% passive healing throughput throughout. So make that decision on your own. Taking a look at the breakdowns for Holy, healing breakdowns almost don't really matter since every key's circumstances may be different, but there's a few important things I need you to remember here. Firstly, note that heal is going to do more actual healing than flash heal. Note that Ascended Blast actually does heal. Note how much the totally passive talent Trail of Light ends up healing for, and also look at how much your mastery does overall. Now keep all this in the back of your mind. Taking a look at the damage breakdown, typically Ascended Blast or Eruption will be your top, with Divine Star usually trailing around them. Eruption and Divine Star will likely take over in higher count dungeons like the Other Side, Gambit, and Mechagon Junkyard, while Blast will take over in pretty much every other dungeon or in cases where the pulls are smaller. Everything else on this breakdown isn't too important to note for now. We'll mention where these other spells come in later on. And we'll look at 2 example pulls. In this first example, this is a moment where you will assume the role of mainly a damage dealer. I have lots of cooldowns available defensively if anything goes wrong, so I throw up a couple dots, Holy Fire and Divine Star while the tank is gathering mobs. Then once they're grouped, I go into Boon of the Ascended and blast as much damage as I can, and finish off with another Divine Star at the end of Boon. After this, if it's single target, I'd go into Holy Fire and Smite spam, but in 3ish or more targets, I just sit there and spam Holy Nova until it's all dead or I have to heal. However, in the second example, this is a pull that needs healing more than damage. Holy very heavily leans on simply casting heal, while being assisted by small things like Prayer of Mending and Circle of Healing that are doing very efficient background healing, as well as many long cooldowns to rotate through to maintain extremely high HPS if you need it. The healing gameplay ends up being a combination of using GS on the tank if he needs it, keeping yourself alive as passively as possible, and casting heals on people who take damage that isn't just picked up by background healing. Any situation you find yourself in will be some combination or derivative of these things. Before we get into rotations, you'll always want to maintain Flash Concentration, and I literally mean always. If you let it drop off, you have to commit 5 casts, which is a lot of time and mana to get it back. This is probably the only potentially annoying thing as Holy, but Flash Conc is so impactful that it's worth the trouble. You'll want to stack it up before a key and literally cast Flash Heal every 20 seconds or less the entire key to keep it up the entire time. And definitely get a Weak Aura to help you track Flash Concentration and to track Surge of Light procs, as these will serve as your easiest way to refresh the buff because you won't need to cast. And you may even find yourself having to dismount when your group is moving to refresh your buff and then remount up. But because of the importance of maining the buff, you will always use heal over flash heal when actually healing people. Flash heal should be thought of as a tool just to maintain Flash Conc's buff. Once you're at 5 stacks of concentration, both spells have the same cast time, but heal simply heals for more and costs less mana, making it always better. And usually, whenever you're refreshing Flash Conc, you may just flash heal the tank. Even if the tank is not taking damage, chances are they're the one who is most likely to take damage during that cast or immediately after for your mastery. So you just dump flash heals on them if you have no one else to heal, but you need to refresh the buff. Now, every dungeon when practicing, your goal should be having near 100% Flash Conc uptime, and remember it's better to refresh early than to let it fall off. If you ever look at your breakdown and find that Flash Heal is creeping up near or even past heal, it means that you might be casting too many Flash Heals. Or, sometimes if you just never really needed to heal throughout a dungeon, Flash Heal will be on top of your heal just because you maintained the buff but never really had to use it, and that's totally fine. After playing Holy Priest for a while, you'll figure out that you have a defensive button for nearly everything. I've made a cheat sheet that you should look over to give you an idea of what icons cooldowns you need to look for in certain situations. GS can be used every minute to buff people's healing intake. Note that if you're putting this on some tanks like Blood DK, Vengeance DH, Prop Paladin, or maybe even Brewmaster, GS alone is enough to keep them alive 99.9% of the time, because it buffs their self-healing as well. You just want to make sure that you don't waste a cheat death component when you don't want to. This will cause it to incur its full 3-minute cooldown, but better that happens than someone actually dies, so don't stress too much about it. Now, Prayer Mending and Circle of Healing are incredibly efficient heals. Use Mending on cooldown as it's a smart heal, so it won't waste itself unless it times out, and it'll jump around keeping people topped up. Prayer Mending also only heals after the person takes damage, so chances are it won't really overheal. Always use this on cooldown though, and as a bonus the animation kinda looks cool, but it's also just way too efficient to ignore. Circle of Healing is your low cost AoE heal. It won't necessarily save the group, but it's an instant cast and it propagates around the target you use it on, so if the group is not full HP, use it. It's also super efficient on mana. Holy Word Serenity is your massive single target heal. It will top anyone you use it on unless they're a tank or maybe a warlock. And Holy Word Sanctify is the AoE version of that. It heals for more than double a Circle of Healing, which is around 15 to 20% of people's HP currently if it does not crit. Now let's talk about your big healing cooldowns. Divine Hymn is not as good in dungeons as it is elsewhere. It does not do enough healing in dungeons to solo a massive group-wide mechanic. It barely does more than Sanctify, to be honest. But if you preemptively channel it, it'll give the group up to 20% increased healing for 15 seconds. Although, if you find yourself going entire dungeons without using it, that's fine. That healing buff only becomes necessary on extremely challenging keys. Your real healing CD is Apotheosis. This is a throughput cooldown that buffs your already established healing rotation. Pressing it makes your holy words come off cooldown instantly, and it massively buffs the cooldown reduction of your holy words, and making them cost no mana. So you'll still continue healing as you would normally, you'll just be getting a lot more serenities. And we have to talk about how your tier works. It's a series of passive effects, but using it properly is far from passive. The TLDR is when you use a holy word, so Sanctify, Serenity, or Chastise, you buff the next holy word interacting spell. It does buff a few spells, but you will only really be thinking about using this buff on heal itself. What this means in a dungeon is that you can do things like Serenity, cast a heal on someone else that was injured, Sanctify, cast a third heal on someone that's injured, Chastise, and then get another juiced up heal. And the Resonant Words Conduit further buff heals after any holy word. So you can also chastise prior to needing the first heal so that you have a juiced up one whenever you need it. It's not worth overhealing with Serenity just to bank up a juiced heal. You'd be better off holding Serenity for after someone takes damage. But chastise is just a stun. So you should be stunning mobs all the time in dungeons, making you have that one bank to large heal pretty much all the time whenever you need it. This also interacts with everything as you would expect. A larger heal means a larger hot from your mastery and larger potential healing from crits, and larger Trail of Light healing. A final note for healing is Unbind, Renew, and Prayer of Healing. Just take them off your bars entirely and never press them. Prayer of Healing is 2 mana intensive for what little healing it currently does, and you don't really need Sanctify cooldown reduction. Also, Renew just isn't needed. It's a hot in a class that gets all its heals as hots via mastery, so there's no real place for it to fit into playstyle. Everything it can do throughput wise is done better by just not pressing it. And if you run Benediction, it will be casting itself randomly, and that's totally fine, because again, it's completely free and hands off. But seriously, never press these buttons until Blizzard tunes them to be worthwhile. It does suck because I think Prayer of Healing is the coolest animation in the entire kit, and Renew is just a super iconic ability, but it is what it is. Okay, now it's time to talk about the real fun of Holy Priests, the damage. By itself, DPSing as a Holy Priest is simple. While the tank is gathering, Shadow Word Pain mobs and Holy Fire while healing the tank, since usually during gathering is when they'll be taking the most damage. And remember to be very proactive with using Fade to drop threat, as well as using Fade to prog the DR from this conduit. As soon as the pull is gathered, you want to start dealing damage. Divine Star first and then go into your Boon rotation, which is pretty simple. When you first cast Boon, you will pulse damage around the target thanks to Mechanicos, so make sure you cast it on something that's actually in the group of mobs. After Boon finishes this cast, the bind you have for Boon will be replaced with Ascended Nova, and your Smite button will be replaced with Ascended Blast for 10 seconds. Your goal is to use Ascended Blast on cooldown and filled with Ascended Nova. Blast cooldown is also reduced with haste, so you might be able to alternate Blast and Nova at really high haste, but likely you'll have to do like 2 to 3 Novas per single blast. And also, Ascended Blast is exceptionally good priority damage, so even in heavy AoE, it's still worth using Blast on whatever is the highest HP. However, if the pull is like 12 targets and you just want to spam Nova and pad, that's totally fine. Now, Boon might say it's got a 3-minute cooldown, but it really doesn't. Mechanicos will take away 1 minute with the first pulse of damage, and Unity will take another minute off. It's effectively a 60-second cooldown ability as long as it's not single target pulls over and over, further reduced by Shadowlands Season 3's Ur Relic. While we're on the topic of Season 3, if you're in Season 3 and you're still watching this, you can boon and finish the entire boon before Ur dies, and get a second boon within that pull. This will only work if it's a very, very high key that will actually live that long. If not, and especially on bosses, aim to finish Boon's initial cast the second you get Ur's buff. This will allow you to only press blast for the entirety of the boon, which is an insane amount of single target damage and also a lot of healing. Now when you get out of Boon, enough time would have passed for Divine Star to be off cooldown again, so usually you just hit that just out of Boon. And then outside of Boon, Divine Star, and Holy Fire, you just smite and Shadow Word Pain whenever you can to fill gaps. If you're on a pull with like 3 or more targets, you can just Holy Nova spam, but be careful. This isn't that much DPS, and you're kinda in melee, which is often dangerous. Being in near melee for Boon is worth, but dying to melee mechanics because you're Holy Nova spamming is kinda cringe, so be careful. And as we mentioned before, Ascended Blast does actually heal whenever it hits a target. This heal is trying to be smart, but there are many times in keys where one person is dying, everyone else is full, and Blast is healing the tank. I'm not too sure exactly what causes it to be a stupid smart heal, but just pay attention to that. Sometimes you're Blast spamming and the one person who needs healing isn't actually getting it. At that point, you just might have to Serenity them. But before you boon, you need to figure out what you're going to do if the entire group starts taking damage. For you to get the most out of your boon, you need 12 seconds of uninterrupted DPS. If you're scared that you might die, you can Desperate Prayer and Fade, both off the GCD, and you can't really die with them both running unless you start standing and stuff. If you're scared the tank might die, you can GS them, it's off the global and by itself should keep even a mediocre tank alive. And if your group is taking damage, you need to assess whether they're really going to die or if they're just going to go low. If they're actually going to die, you can forget your boon in the interest of keeping them alive. But if they're not literally going to fall on the floor, keep booning. Ascended Blast and the Eruption actually do decent healing to heal through most mechanics on 15 to maybe 20, so they'll be enough to maintain HPs unless your group starts failing multiple mechanics. But if you've seen my video on common Mythic Plus mistakes, you'd know that you shouldn't try to wait for perfect moments. It's better to get multiple boons at say 60% effectiveness than waiting 5 minutes to rip one single perfect boon. And remember once again that boon only consumes your smite button. The entire rest of your healing kit is still existing, so don't panic and think that boon's locking you out of playing your class normally. Feel free to drop your boon and save the group, always. And as you go higher in keys, DPS players who make mistakes will be less of your problem since most things will just start to one-shot them. But that pretty much sums it up for Holy Priest healing and damage. Now to the final chapter, Utility. First and foremost, Symbol of Hope. Channel it and it takes 60 seconds off of major defensives for each person in the party. This is massive, especially if you track your team's defensives and can identify when to use symbols to get them back and then call for it over voice comms or in chat. Next, remember when you die, you turn into Jesus and you can heal for 15 seconds before actually dying. And you are also a dispelling god. You have a friendly dispel that takes out diseases, an offensive spammable magic purge, and mass dispel, which makes bursting affix basically not exist. You have Mind Soothe, which is usable on humanoids and dragons, and with the upcoming expansion Dragonflight, I'd hope the uses for this will increase. Basically, when you Mind Soothe a mob, it lets you get closer to them without getting in combat. I recommend just going out into the world or going into a normal dungeon by yourself and trying it. It'll make more sense if you see for yourself. Your Holy Word Chastise is a stun because of the talent you took, and your other CCs are Shackle Undead, which is a polymorph type 1 minute CC, but only against undeads. And Psychic Scream is of course your AoE Fear. Be careful with using this, as mobs that aren't broken out of the fear will run and pull things in the dungeon. You also have Leap of Faith to pull DPS who are doing stupid shit, and I won't mention mind control usage because you might end up getting yourself killed. Mind controlling something generates massive threat on you, so figure this part out by yourself. And very lastly, Power Infusion, an external 25% haste buff. Use this on whatever you want. You can PI yourself during boons or PI whichever DPS is crying about it. I think external buffs like this shouldn't even be in the game, so I really don't care how or where you use PI. I personally use it on myself to deal more damage 99% of the time, but there are DPS players who will whisper you and link you a whole spreadsheet if you do that, so best of luck. That about wraps it up for Holy Priest. If you have any questions, I'm happy to help anytime, and if you made it this far without subscribing, please let me know what I did wrong and I'll try to fix it. That's all for now. Later.